He had no tanks, no planes, no cannons, just 36 people, men, women, and children, hiding in the mountains of the American Southwest, and yet 5,000 United States Army soldiers could not catch him. For nearly 30 years, one man made the most powerful military on Earth look completely helpless. His name was Geronimo. And this is his real story. Most people have heard the name Geronimo. They have heard soldiers shout it jumping out of planes. They have seen it printed on T-shirts and coffee mugs, but very few people actually know the man behind that name. Very few people know what he lost, what he endured, or what he was truly fighting for. This is not a Hollywood story. There is no happy ending. But it is one of the most remarkable, most honest, and most important stories in the entire history of North America. And if you stay with this video until the very end, you will understand why. And you will never think of Geronimo the same way again. If this story moves you, if you feel like more people deserve to hear it, please share this video. Subscribe to this channel. Because history like this should not be forgotten. It should be told over and over again until everyone knows it. Geronimo was not born with that name. He was born around 1829 in what is now the state of New Mexico. His real name was Goyawe. In the language of his people, the Chiricahua Apache, it means one who yawns. It is a quiet name, a peaceful name. And for a long time, it fit him perfectly. He was not born a warrior. He was not born a chief. He was a young man who lived among his people in the mountains and deserts of the American Southwest. Land that the Apache had called home for centuries before a single European ever set foot on this continent. They had their own laws, their own spiritual beliefs, their own traditions for raising children, honoring the dead, and taking care of the land. As a young man, Goyawe married a woman named Alope. They had 3 children together. He was a husband, a father, and a member of his community. His life, by any measure, was full. It is important to hold on to that picture. The quiet man, the family, the home in the mountains, because everything that comes next begins the moment that picture is destroyed. In March of 1851, a group of Apache men, including Goyawe, traveled to the Mexican town of Llanos to trade. It was a routine trip. Nothing unusual about it. While they were gone, Mexican soldiers from the state of Sonora rode into the Apache camp. They killed his mother. They killed his wife Alope. They killed all 3 of his children. When Goyawe returned from town, he walked back into silence. The camp was in ruins. The people he loved most in the world were gone. He was not allowed to grieve alone. Apache tradition required him to destroy everything that belonged to his family. Their belongings, his wife's handmade items, his children's things, all of it had to be burned or buried. So he stood there, surrounded by smoke and silence, with nothing left. He later said that a voice came to him that night, a spirit voice that told him no gun would ever kill him, that he would survive every battle. He believed this completely, and he carried it with him for the rest of his life. When Mexican soldiers encountered him in battle, they reportedly cried out to St. Jerome for protection, "Geronimo!" and the name stuck. From that point forward, the world would know him not as the quiet young man from the mountains, but as Geronimo. The United States government in the 1860s and 1870s had a clear policy when it came to Native American peoples: move them onto reservations, give up your land, give up your way of life, go quietly to a small piece of assigned territory and stay there. Most people in Geronimo's position had no real choice. The American military was massive. The government had resources, supply lines, weapons, and the full weight of a growing nation behind it. Resistance, on paper, was impossible. Geronimo chose resistance anyway, but he did not choose it blindly. He was not reckless. He was one of the most tactically brilliant guerrilla fighters in recorded military history. He used the terrain of the American Southwest like no one else alive. He could lead a group of people 70 miles in a single day through desert and mountain terrain where fully equipped soldiers on horseback struggled to survive. He knew every canyon, every water source, every ridge line, every escape route in thousands of square miles of wilderness. His strategy was not to stand and fight. It was to appear, strike, and vanish before the army could respond. He never engaged in battles he could not win. He chose when and where every confrontation happened, and when the odds turned against him, He simply disappeared into the landscape. Army officers described trying to track him as chasing a ghost.
Over the course of his resistance, Geronimo surrendered to the United States government 3 separate times, and 3 separate times he escaped from the reservations where he was placed. The first time was in 1876. The U.S. government forcibly moved the Chiricahua Apache from their Arizona homeland to the San Carlos Reservation, a much harsher piece of land with poor conditions. Geronimo refused to accept it. He led over 700 people away from the reservation and south into the Sierra Madre Mountains of Mexico, a remote and brutal wilderness where the army could not easily follow. He returned to the reservation in 1878, but the conditions had not improved. He left again. Raids continued across both sides of the U.S.-Mexico border. The Mexican and American governments were furious. They coordinated military pressure from both sides, trying to squeeze him from 2 directions at once. It did not work. The most famous escape came in 1885. After formally surrendering to U.S. General George Crook and returning to the San Carlos Reservation, Geronimo changed his mind. The night before the official surrender ceremony was to take place, he slipped away into the darkness. With him went just 38 people, a small group that included women and children. The United States government responded by deploying approximately 5,000 soldiers to find him. That was 1/4 of the entire U.S. Army at the time. 1/4 of the country's military, chasing 38 people through the mountains. The chase lasted 18 months. They never caught him. By 1886, the situation had shifted. Geronimo's band was exhausted. His people had been on the run continuously for months. The supply routes through Mexican villages were being cut off. The mountain passes they relied on were being mapped and patrolled, and the U.S. Army had changed tactics. General Nelson Miles, who had replaced General Crook, took a different approach. Instead of focusing only on chasing Geronimo, he ordered the removal of the entire Chiricahua Apache population from the southwest, including the scouts who had helped the army track Geronimo. He was eliminating everyone Geronimo had left to protect and return to. On September 4th, 1886, at a place called Skeleton Canyon in southern Arizona, Geronimo surrendered for the last time. He was 57 years old. He handed over his rifle. He shook hands with General Miles. He did not surrender because he was beaten in battle. In nearly 30 years of conflict, Geronimo was never defeated in a direct military engagement. He surrendered because there was no longer anything left to fight for. His people had been removed. His homeland was gone. Continuing the fight would have meant leading his last surviving followers to their deaths, and he would not do that. That decision, to stop fighting in order to save lives, was not defeat. It was a different kind of courage entirely. What happened to Geronimo after his surrender is one of the strangest chapters in American history. He was classified as a prisoner of war and sent first to Fort Pickens in Florida, far from his homeland and his people. He was then moved to Mount Vernon Barracks in Alabama. Finally, he was sent to Fort Sill in Oklahoma, where he would spend the rest of his life. Still technically a prisoner of war, still never allowed to return to Arizona. But at the same time, America had become fascinated with him. He became, in a strange and complicated way, a celebrity. In 1904, he appeared at the World's Fair in St. Louis, where crowds lined up to see him. In 1905, he rode in President Theodore Roosevelt's inaugural parade in Washington, D.C. He sold autographed photographs of himself. He was photographed sitting in an early automobile. He dictated his own life story, published in 1906 as his memoir, one of the very first autobiographies written by a Native American. He once asked President Roosevelt directly to be allowed to return home to Arizona. Roosevelt refused. Geronimo died on February 17, 1909 at Fort Sill, Oklahoma. He died a prisoner of war. He never saw Arizona again. The name Geronimo entered the American language as a word for courage, for defiance, for throwing yourself into the unknown. U.S. paratroopers shouted it leaping from planes during World War II. It became a part of popular culture so embedded that most people stopped asking where it came from. But it came from a real man. A man who lost everything, his family, his home, his freedom, and still refused to disappear. A man who, with almost nothing, held off the full force of the United States military for 3 decades, not because he believed he would win forever, but because some things are worth standing for, even when the odds are impossible. His story is also a reminder of what happens when history is written only by the powerful. For a long time, Geronimo was described in American history books as a savage, a criminal, a problem to be solved. The men who chased him were the heroes. The men who removed his people from their land were described as progress. What actually happened was something far more complex, far more painful, and far more human than that simple story ever allowed. Geronimo never got his land back. He never got his family back. He lived out his final years as a prisoner in a country that had taken everything from him, and he never stopped asking to go home. But he also never stopped being himself. He told his own story. He looked into the cameras. He signed his own name, and he made sure the world could not forget him. That is not a small thing. That is everything. If this story meant something to you today, if you think more people deserve to know the real Geronimo, share this video right now. Drop a comment below and tell us what part of his story hit you the hardest. And if you want more true stories that history tried to bury, subscribe to this channel because we are just getting started.